All right, we're going to dive into the presentation today, from burnout to breakthrough. We're talking about how to build a thriving organization. We've got some fantastic guest speakers with us today. So let's get started. We will be recording this presentation. All right. So I'm Erin. I am the VP of Marketing and Communications here at Spektrix. I'm excited to bring this presentation to you. Before we get into the meat of it, just a couple of housekeeping items. Feel free to chat with each other in the chat if you'd like, but if you do want to ask questions, we'll take questions from the audience near the end, and just feel free to drop those into the Q&A button. We'll prioritize those as we have the time, so thanks so much for doing that. And joining me today, we have Cate Foltin, Cheyenne Queen, and Mike Geller. I'll let them introduce themselves. We'll start with Cate.
Morning. I'm Cate Foltin from the Macomb Center for the Performing Arts. We are in almost our 45th season, 1,300 seat house, also up to a 250 seat black box, and a cultural center that can hold up to 500 people for events, meetings, presentations, performances, and we run almost year round at this point between the two venue sites. And we've been with Spektrix since 2023, headed into our fourth season coming up. Hard to believe already. And looking forward to hearing from everybody this morning. And welcome from whatever day, morning, evening, middle of the night, or wherever you've clocked in from. Welcome to joining us this morning.
Thanks, Cate. And then Cheyenne Queen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cheyenne. I work at Music Theatre Wichita in Wichita, Kansas. And we are typically a summer theater. We're a five-show summer educational theater. We are going into our 55th season. We operate mainly out of two venues. And then we have an academy program that is our education program that is a little bit more year-round. And like ticketing wise, I'm kind of by myself when we're not in season, but we do gain some extra folks in our box office when we are in our summer season, and we have six total box office members plus myself.
Thanks, Cheyenne. And last but not least, Mike.
All right. Hello, everyone. Mike Geller, president of Spektrix for US and Canada, based in our New York location, and happy to be here.
Thanks, Mike. Spektrix, just for those who may not be familiar, we provide ticketing, CRM marketing, fundraising solution, including things like payments, reporting, and websites. We are located in the US and the UK, and we serve Ireland, Canada, and Australia as well. So we won't talk too much about Spektrix today, but if you're interested in hearing more, just drop a note in the chat and we will make sure to reach out to you. But let's move into why we're here today. And this is a research project that we undertook in conjunction with the Intix organization called Powered by Purpose. We really wanted to take a look at the ticketing workforce today. We surveyed about 268 audience-facing professionals globally, including in areas of ticketing, marketing, fundraising, and leadership. And the goal was we really wanted to understand what folks are feeling, what they're saying, what they're hearing, and what we can do about it. And what that means is how the narrative that we're hearing the zeitgeist in the industry is actually paralleling to what we're hearing from folks. So before we get into the actual survey results, can you just take a quick moment and tell us how you would describe your current workforce status? There's a few options there on the screen, and we'll just see how few people respond. All right. Looks like mostly stable but stretched is the consensus, with a few folks feeling very stable, which is great, and then a little bit of high on instability and a few folks who are unsure. So I think that this content will really speak to the folks who are feeling stable but stretched, and definitely to the actively unstable as well. And for you who are very stable, there's definitely some takeaways in here as well in terms of how to make sure that burnout doesn't creep into your organization. So let's dive into it. We're very involved in conversations in the arts, in conferences, in articles, and we keep hearing the same kind of narrative, which is that teams are stretched, burnout is rising, people are leaving the sector for better pay, better conditions. But we wanted to pressure test that and see if that's actually how people are feeling, and if so, what the nuance is behind those feelings, because it isn't necessarily just we aren't getting paid enough, we want to leave. So we dug into that with the survey that I mentioned. And we found a few things that were a little bit interesting and a little contrary to what we expected. One thing is nearly two-thirds of folks who responded to the survey said they were planning to stay in the sector for the next 5 years. So this really wasn't a story about mass exit in the sector. It's more about that large undecided middle section that we still have influence over in keeping them there, but we needed to better understand what the factors would be that would contribute to their decision, and what's pushing them to make a change and how we can help them make their career in this sector. We found that this is a deeply committed workforce, that more than 90% of folks in the sector who took the survey said that they feel their work positively contributes to audiences, to communities. And this is interesting. We looked at other similar surveys across sectors, and the highest we saw was around 80%. Some of those surveys said about 50% were feeling that their work was positive and made a positive influence on the world. So certainly this industry has a much higher view of the work they do. Ticketing work is not viewed as transactional. It's very essential across communities, building connections, and live events are important to society. I think we can see that most recently from the Olympics. There are so few things that bring people together at the same time around the same cause. Shared experiences are really important to building community. And that sense of purpose is the foundation of people staying in the sector. So we're going to do one more poll in this section, and then we'll give you a break and you can just sit back and listen. But we want to ask you, what do you believe keeps your strongest staff members in their roles? Yeah, that's actually great. So very much in line with what we found in our research is that belief in the mission is paramount. And then second is team culture and leadership. Um, Pay and benefits, yes, it matters, but it's certainly not one of the higher contributors. And job security, career progression are also key factors. So a lot of the respondents told us that they stayed despite the pay because of these other reasons that you see on the screen. They believe in the mission, they see the value of those shared experiences, they feel a responsibility to communities and to audiences. And I think what we learned is that purpose doesn't just replace pay. You still obviously need to get paid, but it does help to gain things like patience when you're working through maybe budgetary constraints or times that may be a little difficult. It gains loyalty, it gains resilience in your staff. And this is one of the quotes that one of the respondents gave us that we thought was so important, because what it tells us is that people, when they do plan to leave, it's rarely about just salary. It's things like limited progression opportunities. It's poor work-life balance, the feeling of spinning your wheels and never getting ahead. And I think we'll talk about that a little more from a first-person perspective during the panel, but that does lead to things like burnout. Leadership and autonomy and confidence are just as important, if not more, than compensation. I'm actually going to skip this Slido. because I told you we wouldn't do another one in this section. One thing that we wanted to highlight is that mid-level managers are really in a unique position. They are in a situation where they're probably feeling the bulk of the strain in your organization because they have more responsibility than they did, in their previous years of their career, but they don't necessarily have the same level of reward that they will later. So they're in that nadir where they're really feeling the most pressure with the least reward. And that coincides often with high pressure personal moments like young families, higher costs in their life, trying to balance, etc. So the mid-level is really burning out at a higher rate, and that creates succession risk at the higher levels. So, how do we live with this tension? People are not choosing between the work and surviving. They are trying to do both. And a lot of workers will accept lower financial rewards if they can continue to make an impact. Burnout happens when workloads increase, resources shrink, and even things like commercial pressure kind of watering down the mission or making the mission a little less clear. And these issues compound with pay and benefits problems to create really an untenable solution. So what would help right now? And this is directly information that we heard from survey respondents. These requests were universal across roles, across regions, across career stages. What's missing here from this list is not pay and perks. It's really about the structure of work and how it can be better structured to support folks. So most employees are looking for things like collaboration and clarity. They tell us what they want, but we have a hard time delivering it. Why do we have a hard time? Because it's actually a little bit harder than it sounds. We're dealing with things like silos and manual workarounds. Day-to-day things just get in the way. Data lives all over the place. It's in multiple different places. Processes have typically evolved over time rather than being deliberately designed to help suit the industry or the organization. Leaders are often spending their time firefighting instead of enabling and building careers. And these challenges compound under pressure. So think about times like peak on sales, budgetary constraints. That's when these things really become illuminated. And this is the environment in which people are trying to do meaningful, mission-driven work. So this is where tech comes into play. It can either amplify a efficient work system or it can exacerbate a muddy system, which is what we see more often. Poorly thought out tech decisions can add more friction. It can determine how work flows across teams, who shapes or makes decisions, how much manual work hides behind busy seasons. It influences how confident staff feels in high pressure moments, and it determines whether systems support people or people prop up systems. And this is where technology isn't a tech problem, it's actually a people problem. So, we wanted to ask folks about joy because this is an industry where a lot of people come because they feel joy and they want to feel joy. We said, what will help you spend more time in your day on the things that bring you joy? And again, most of what we heard was not about perks. It was not about motivation. It was about collaboration, efficiency, clarity. Nearly a third said that better collaboration and communication would help them. Another quarter said they want to be able to work more efficiently or see the impact that their work is having. And others highlighted clear goals, easier access to data and insights, and more interaction with the audience. What's consistent is that they're all shaped by how work is designed and the systems that support it. So these responses point to one thing. Systems and workflows largely determine whether people can focus on the meaningful work or they spend their time firefighting and doing things that don't make them feel joy. So, what does good tech implementation look like? This is where a strategy for tech implementation becomes the experience that your workforce experiences. So it doesn't just speed things up or add more features that they need. It helps reduce cognitive load. It makes success visible across the organization. It gives leaders and others their time back. And if you do this well, the organization as a whole will see things like lower burnout, stronger internal trust built, and more resilient teams. This isn't about just buying good technology, it's about implementation and designing better work processes. And how does this impact the sector at large? Well, first of all, you have to understand that the workforce is committed, they're not complacent. And purpose is a powerful retention tool, but it is fragile. So the biggest risk isn't that people are going to leave tomorrow. It's about losing momentum and enthusiasm and knowledge and ultimately leadership capacity over time. So, our call to action for you as we go through this discussion as a panel. Think about where your teams are stressed unnecessarily, how friction could better be removed through tools or better defined priorities? How visible is the mission and the organizational impact to staff? And what would make undecided people choose to stay in the sector? And just to leave you with a final quote from the survey that we thought was interesting. The data shows that retention is strongly linked to how work is structured and supported, not just to compensation. So we're going to move into the panel, but before we do that, we'd love to hear from you. Which of these teams feels like the hardest part of leading or being part of a ticketing team right now? Is it hiring and onboarding, retaining staff, managing workload and burnout, supporting growth with limited resources, or keeping up with changing expectations from the team? Yeah, managing workload and burnout is definitely in the lead here. Supporting growth, close second, gaining. And then, of course, keeping up with changing expectations, both from audiences and from team members. Great. We really appreciate the insights. We're going to move now into the panel discussions. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll bring Cate, Mike, and Cheyenne back into the conversation. And Cheyenne, I want to start with you because you have a unique story where you went from being in the sector to actually being the personification of this feedback, which is someone who got burned out and left. And then you came back. So tell us a little about your story.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can kind of be a bit of a poster child for burnout. I started working in the sector about 11 years ago. And right after college, I got this really cool, amazing job with a theater company in Connecticut that they are a smaller nonprofit, but they do all new original work that has a tie to human rights. So every show that they work on or every show that comes to the theater is some sort of human rights tie. So I was all in. I was like, this is the most amazing job I'm ever going to get. I've moved halfway across the country. I'm no longer near my parents. This is great. So I started as a stage manager with them. And because they're smaller, it's a 90 seat theater, so it's quite small. I started like slowly more and more getting more jobs to where I had 3 jobs in total with this theater company. And I wasn't paying attention to how much I was working. And unfortunately, it got to the point where my body literally quite imploded on itself. Unrelated, I don't think you can make your appendix rupture from stress, but it was a nice kind of like wake up call of like, I can't do this job anymore because I'm in the hospital, but also of like, I need to listen to myself more. So after that, I did decide to leave the sector. I'm a bit of a, if something becomes too competitive, I don't want to do it anymore. Like, I just want to have fun. So it kind of felt like working in theater and working as a stage manager wasn't what I wanted to do full time anymore. So I actually moved into higher education, unrelated to the sector, and worked for a couple of colleges, but still worked in community theater on the side. So I still was stage managing and ushering, but it was at night where I had a separation of kind of like a work life balance, more so than being a stage manager from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then with COVID, when we could no longer do theater and it got taken away kind of in a different way for me, I kind of realized that I wanted maybe to look back at going into theater again, but in a different role. And I found this role with Music Theater Wichita, where I can still have a separation. I'm not going to be working all day and all night, but it keeps me in the sector with what I love. I still had a joy for theater. I still was listening to all the songs and watching what was coming down the pipeline and going to be new. And it allowed me, though, to have a break from it. And Music Theater Wichita is where I started watching theater. I'm from Wichita originally. So my love for theater started with my parents taking me to Music Theater Wichita shows. So to be able to work in the sector, have a balance that I know that I need in my life, and do it at a place where kind of cultivated my passion for it, um, was really nice. And I went for it. And 5 years later, and we're doing good, and I'm able to manage myself a little better than college Cheyenne was.
Can you talk a little, Cheyenne, about the guilt of leaving and how that kind of you had to wrestle with that when you made the decision to leave?
I did, yeah. The theater that I worked for in Connecticut, because they did like human rights activists, like advocacy work, I felt so bad leaving because I just believe in what they do and I still follow them to this day. And the guilt of leaving it, not because there wasn't another person that could come in and stage manage a small show, but I felt like it wasn't quite my choice to leave, really. But I left him in a pickle. It was Tech Week when I left. So I had major guilt of like, this is not the best place for me to leave, nor time, maybe for this theater. And so that kept me away for a while because I felt guilty of like, if I step in this again and then I burn myself out again, I can't do that to another organization. So it did keep me out for a while. But then I just decided that that can't be where my mindset comes from. I need to shift how I work on my work-life balance within me, how I can have conversations with coworkers. Who can I tell that I have this problem that they can tell me to stop, if something happens again or they can see a trend happening again.
Yeah, Mike, you've been in organizations with deep tech structures and things. Can you talk about like that commitment that Cheyenne is talking about and how tech can kind of mask that the commitment is there, but maybe the tech isn't actually working for them?
Yeah. Well, a bit. I mean, candidly, I can't talk as, like I've never been in, your shoes, Cheyenne, and I don't come from that, perspective. So mine is much more on the foundational, just tech and business and how it's supporting organizations sort of achieve their missions. But I come from outside the sector, and what was clear before coming to Spektrix but now is really clear now that I'm at Spektrix and seeing this world, where I've been the last 8 years, is yeah, there is no sector like this in terms of that, commitment to mission, commitment to joy, commitment to helping the world that I've seen. And so the strengths are obvious in that this is like a wonderful sector in which to work and drive towards. But the weaknesses are that, some of the commitment that you just framed up, Cheyenne, I think means that people are willing to put up with so much more bad tech, bad processes, bad shaky foundation. Basically, putting it bluntly, it seems like putting up with more pain and, aggravation than many in these other sectors. And so of course the ideal is, how do we get to both? How do we keep the mission, the joy, the rightful commitment, but let's get some good tech, some good processes, and make sure that foundation is solid to support the good as well as it can.
Yeah, and I want to bring Cate in here. Cate, you have dealt with under-resourcing, you've dealt with, lack of staff or less staff than you would like to have in certain situations. You've had to do things like overtime and filling gaps temporarily. Can you talk about how you've made it through those times and where you've had better structure help, even when you didn't have the money to kind of like hire more people?
Well, the industry, every season is different from every other season. So it's controlled chaos, basically. But when you're doing 150 plus 200 events a year, you work at an organization that restricts the amount of time your part-time staff can work, you are under a lot of stress in making sure that you are open when you need to be open, you're there for the public when you need to be there, and you are structuring time so that people can have their work-life balance, not just you, but your team, and meeting their needs outside of what you may need in terms of coverage. And we work on a fairly flexible schedule for our team, and I spend days in the box office myself, which is great because it keeps me flexible in the system, and it also allows me to hear firsthand what the public is dealing with or what my box office team is. I can experience it firsthand. It's not all hearsay. And we do finally got the college a few years ago to allow us to pay our part-time people overtime. And that has been, we have to, by labor laws, not do it every week, not do it in multiple weeks in a consistent row, because then they transition to a different type of employee labor. But it does give us a little bit flexibility in those weeks where, hey, we've got 25 hours of box office and we have 22 hours of performance time where we need to be open. Everybody is going to be over their limit. And so far, the college has supported us in that. So, but it was a struggle to get that. And we do pay for overtime for anything over 8 hours in a shift. That's also relatively a post-COVID change.
Yeah, I want to focus in on that middle management layer that we mentioned was maybe feeling it the most. So I'll throw this to both Kate and Cheyenne, but you've had to deal with being middle management at times in your career and now managing middle management and help translate the strategy from the leadership down to them and also feed back up to leadership things that middle management is experiencing. Can you talk about that experience of the middle management and how you interpret their specific pain?
I'll go first on that one. I think with middle managers, the problem, the thing that I've experienced most is that there is a lot of responsibility, and sometimes the authority does not keep up with the responsibility, the decision-making capabilities and authority to implement the responsibilities that are handed down from higher up. And working through that, finding a consensus point where everybody, okay, well, if we allow them to do all of this, also again, is that outside of their job description scope? Does that, there's a lot of being part of a college university, there's a lot of HR influences sometimes that get in our way. But I think that is the biggest stress for middle management. At least I know with my staff when I was in their positions, it's like, I can do all of this, but you either got to give me the resources or give me the time. And then when I do it, you can't yell at me for doing it.
Yeah, Cheyenne, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think sometimes where it can go wrong is in communication. I can say firsthand, sometimes you're afraid to say, I don't have enough time to do this or this. Um, and that can be a thing in a lot of organizations. I will say one thing that has helped us tremendously at Music Theater Wichita to help solve that is we have weekly, what we call revenue pacing meetings, where it is all about communication and collaboration. And we are able to meet face to face and say, I don't have the time to do this. I need help. Or I don't have the time to do this. How can this shift so that we can do it? And we're all in one room together. It's our development team, our marketing team, myself, and our managing director. And that has helped tremendously figure out where everybody is struggling, where is everybody, tired, what are we tired of working on that we are trying to get it to the end. And so that has been really helpful in figuring out where things are going wrong, but also how to solve them and how to get us to the end.
Yeah, Mike, that middle management level tends to be kind of like emotional shock absorbers, but they're also operationally very critical, right? They tend to be the ones that are most familiar with the systems.
Yeah, I think there's two angles to this. So, Kate's mentioning like sort of delegation being passed down from like upper leadership to middle managers, but without necessarily the authority. And I guess what I would add to that is not just authority, but it's tricky because I think sometimes executives or leaders will say, okay, I want to empower you, I want to delegate to you and have you do it. And so they'll say, this is for you to do. But there isn't clear outcomes or what success looks like. Well, like, what are we trying to actually accomplish in the end? It's not, they haven't given all the context of what this person, this manager needs to know to be able to do this. And so actually what is sort of portrayed as empowerment or delegation actually becomes just stress and like, burnout. So you get crunch from that side. And then I think from the other side, it's again back to these systems. If there's a lack of systems that are talking to each other and coherent data that you can just get easily at your fingertips, and if well, yeah, I mean, basically, if there's a lack of automation and like you can't rely on the system, then it becomes human power that's having to connect everything, and you're plugging all these gaps, and we're seeing this, in many places. And as you say, that middle manager, that person with all this knowledge now and all this holding things together and trying to keep leadership connected to the individual contributors on at the box office and what have you, and it all just becomes so much. And then to lose that person, if they do burn out or if they decide to leave the sector or even just your organization, is catastrophic, and really hard to backfill. Where do you go with that? So it's about proliferating the data, democratizing it, getting everyone, Cheyenne, your point about how you are meeting with each department all together and you're saying, how are we going to do this with one similar view? You're all looking at the same data, the same, solution or platform. And I think that's the key, is like, how do we string this stuff together so it's less on the human power and more automation from the data and the machines, I guess.
Yeah. It's not even them leaving, although that is the ultimate, but even just being disengaged or feeling, uninspired can
Yeah.
influence how the middle management team works. Mike, I want you to kind of take that to the next step now. So, how can tech help solve that? Like, how can it help shape decisions and how decisions are made and how confident teams can be?
I think it does come back to, one of the worst things I imagine that can be had, and we'll hear this at times, is like, if you're running fragmented systems and you're getting two different answers around the same topic from the different systems, like, what do you do with that? Because all of a sudden now you can't rely on the data. You're trying to make these business critical decisions, but you don't even know what real is right now, let alone therefore how to measure, where you're trying to go. And so I think it does really come back to that consistent, source of truth, data, and making sure that every person in the organization can rely on what they're seeing, can rely on the data that they're seeing. If there's no trust in that, if there's no trust in the systems and the processes and the data, um, basically, if the foundation isn't secure and strong, then how do you move the business forward? How do you make informed decisions, and so on and so forth? So I do think it's about getting as much together and single source of truth as possible that all the teams within an organization can surround and then bounce ideas back and forth on.
Cheyenne, have you seen that happen where a system has built confidence and how that changes, the dynamic of the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just with us with Spektrix in general, that changed our team dramatically. We went from a system that was not sophisticated at all to having Spektrix, which is very sophisticated and can pull so much data that we almost went too far in trying to segment things. And once we understood that we went too far and we pulled it back and really relied on smaller data or different types of data to help us, we found a groove of where it fit us best. And I think it's also about not being afraid to fail, like trying things and realizing this might not work and our patrons may hate this, but you can learn so much when you just let your patrons also be the ones to tell you different things. Like if you've tried, we're going to sell it to them this way and it didn't work, then you can learn so much more than trying to read the data too much on your own.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of toss that same question over to you, Kate. Just examples of like when you've seen shifts of maybe people feeling supported by data or supported by technology versus, maybe not so much.
Oh, and we went, like Cheyenne, we went from a different ticketing platform to where we are today. And just some of the basic functionality, the ease of the ticket buying path, both in the box office and online for the patron, has really just amped up our ability to serve our community, to serve our rental clients, our community partners, our season, almost to the point with like Cheyenne was saying, to now where they're like, can you do this? And if I say no, they're like shocked, because the system is that flexible. But one of the things in terms of our decision-making process is that the ability of people to pull reports and know that if they slice and dice it, it's the same information. It's not like, oh, it's purple to green to red to yes or no. And we've also, in terms of our ticket buying path for our patrons, we have upped our technology. We've gone to Spektrix payments. We have Google Pay, Apple Pay, all the pays. And wallets. And it's been a learning curve for our patrons. But the shift from the beginning of this first season all the way down has been tremendous. We went to delayed delivery on tickets to try and fight some other words that we won't talk about here. And at first a lot of, I never got my tickets, I never got my tickets, I never got my tickets. Well, did you? And to now where it's like, hey, I haven't got my tickets yet. Where's the regenerated ticket? So I think it's also giving people time to catch up with the technology we're launching. And if there's immediate confusion, that just explain it, have clear guidelines, clear paths, instructions, and also listening back to my team from what they're hearing. That's been tremendous. And them coming up with very good, hey, let's try it this way. So not only being willing to fail, but willing to commit to, like, we know it's different. We just got to get them, stick with it. You don't want to lose. Sometimes people in our industry, oh, I don't like this technology, and they dump it before they've really learned it. And I think that's sometimes going the opposite way.
Yeah, that's interesting. We'd love to hear from folks in the audience too. So feel free to, drop your story in the chat if you're feeling similar stress or if this resonates with you. I want to shift a little to empowerment, because empowerment was something we heard from survey respondents. They don't always feel, and it is important to them wanting to stay in the sector. Um, what's the difference between empowerment and delegation? And Mike, I want to kind of start with you about like, how can tech be used either as a delegation tool and in maybe the wrong way, and how can it be used to empower teams in a better way?
Cool. I will take a shot at that. I mean, I think, some of what I was saying earlier about obviously how things are passed along and from leadership to managers and beyond, and again, not having all the context, et cetera. From a tech perspective, I think, it's like the impression I get, and I'm happy to be corrected by all 100 and however 130 attendees you have today. People aren't generally going into arts administration or the arts or cultural or live entertainment because they're really excited about the idea of writing SQL queries and like stringing tech together and whatever. It's to engage with audiences and expand audiences, deepen relationships, and put on great works that are of art and entertainment, and cultural importance. And so I guess tech wise, it goes back to like how simple is the tech that you're using? How accessible is it? Kate, I think you just mentioned like easy to pull reports and look at this data. So the data might all be there. The first thing I was talking about, earlier, but if you have to know a computer language or some, weird mechanisms to be able to access that data, then actually what use is it for the teams and the team members who are not, again, likely here being like, I'm the most tech savvy person in the world and I want to learn this tech. So I think it's about bringing all the functions of a powerful, solution to the surface so they're accessible by everyone, and just making it incredibly easy to use. And then surrounding that also with like, the provider you're with needs to give you a service beyond just the software. It has to be hands-on training, and how often can we get together? Let's screen share, let's do, and not charging for that, including that as part of what they offer, because that is the solution, that is the service. And I think these are all things that we take really seriously to make sure we are partnered up and ultimately driving our shared mission, which is to expand the audiences of arts, cultural, and live entertainment organizations, and deepen relationships with them. And that we're working together towards that end. And that's how you stay away from burnout and crunch and middle management. And, then delegation is not such a heavy thing. It's like, yeah, great. I can use these systems. I know the data. I'm going to figure this out with the team. It's a much different story versus, oh my God, how am I even going to go about this? And, now my neck is on the line if things don't go well with this because it's been handed off to me. And that's not where we want our teams.
Yeah, I kind of want to drill into that. Maybe Cheyenne, you can speak to this. The idea of being told that you own something or you're empowered to do something, but you've not been given the authority, the tools, whatever it takes to actually do that thing, and how that can kind of create anxiety and stress.
Yeah, I think it can create confusion because you're like, I'm not quite sure how to, like, what do they want me to pull if they did like say expressively, like, this is what you have, this is what you need to do. I know I get really confused. I am a context queen. If you can't tell me why I am doing something, I'm going to be confused about it and I'm going to feel like I don't fully own it. So I think having the conversations of here is why I need you to pull this data, here is what it's going to help us do, really helps me figure out exactly why I need to do it. Because I'm also not going to have fun doing it if it's not for anything I want to have fun with. And then one other thing that I think has helped me, especially, is when you are able to kind of be the person that can share the information. Like if this is information you're pulling to share with people, when you can be the person that then gets to share it, I think it's kind of like an empowerment of its own. And we do this specifically at Music Theater Wichita, especially with our board meetings. We have open board meetings at Music Theater Wichita. So all of our full-time 14 staff members go to our board meetings. And so the information that I'm pulling, I am then telling other people, here is what we've looked at. And that really helps me really do a good job of pulling the information, figuring out why I'm doing it, and then explaining it also gives me the confidence to understand what I just did with technology or why we need it. And then I'm able to share it with people who are our firsthand patrons who have questions about it sometimes as well.
Let's spend a few moments on the joy part of this. And I'll start with you, Kate. Joy is such a big component of why we do what we do, right? So where do you still feel joy in the work today?
Oh, there's so many. I think it's when the audiences are coming into the venue. There's, if it's a father-daughter date and it's one of the princess shows from Disney or the ballets, and she's dressed up as Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty or something, and just that type of excitement coming into the building, watching kids, their first experience when we do our school programs, their first time seeing a live show, and how energized they are when they're coming out, or if we're having a good old rock concert on stage and the audiences are just having a great time. Those are the moments of joy. Or when, I get compliments about my staff, that brings me joy. Um, but it's the gotcha moments. And I think I talked about this at Intix. It's where the person comes in and they're being dragged by whoever bought the tickets to the show. It's a Friday night. They'd rather be at home with the beer and a pizza and their feet up on the sofa. And they go from not being very engaged to sitting forward in the show. And that gotcha moment, we got you engaged. That from day one has always brought me joy. But I wanted to refer back to something Cheyenne said. I think what the core of her empowerment comes from feeling like she's been heard and seen. And I try to instill that into my staff. I don't know the software as well as they do. I admit it. I can do the back end stuff, but in the day-to-day stuff, and I want them always to feel like they can come forward with a suggestion on, we could do it better if we did it this way. Or did you know we could simplify the process if we did it this way? And even if we don't implement their suggestions, I want them to always feel comfortable knowing that they'll be heard, that they'll be seen, and that they'll be considered. And then they'll be informed of what the decision is after that. Because sometimes you just get told no and you don't get told why. Or sometimes you get someone else takes credit for their work. I always share the credit. If they make the suggestion, I funnel it all the way up. Because I think that being heard and valued and seen is what helps eliminate burnout and stress more than anything. And Cheyenne, you're so inspiring, because I started off as a stage manager and I just realized that everything we do is opening night, and we're all, and middle managers and managers are stage managers. They're, hey, marketing programs here, front of house, are the ushers here, go, go, go. And so they're working in conjunction with this actual stage manager on the stage. But you're awesome, Cheyenne. I just want you to say that.
We've got a few questions coming in, but feel free to throw some more into the Q&A. Cheyenne, last question to you as well is just more about that joy. The same question as we asked Kate. Where do you find joy?
I love the moments when I can geek out with a patron or geek out with one of my staff members about a show they've seen or something that just that they streamed or something that happened in their life. I will geek out no other than when people want to start talking theater to me about this cast member's doing this or this person's doing this now. And I love when patrons do that, or they find me in the lobby and they're like, that was amazing. How did this happen? Those little conversations are what keep me going. And I will think about those moments for forever, because then when you have a not so nice interaction, those are the moments that you think of to be like, okay, that was not an amazing patron I just spoke with, but I'm going to remember this patron I spoke with yesterday, and then I'm good to go.
Let's dive into a couple of questions, just being mindful of time. So we have one here talking about middle managers being some of the most stressed, and why do we think that is? And are there any examples you have of how we can help them grow into confident senior leaders? Anyone want to take that one?
I'll jump in. Cheyenne, do you want to?
No, go Kate.
I was just going to say, I think, first of all, it's the responsibility without the authority, and sometimes it's without the learning tools needed. And if we can provide them with the learning tools, if we can provide them with the knowledge base about why it's important, I think that goes a long way to easing stress. Again, if they're having a bad day, just be in a place where they can come and talk safely, and vent safely, eat chocolate safely, whatever it is that they need to get through their day. But I think that is one of the key things we can do with reducing stress, is making sure that they have the skills that they need to do what we're asking them to do. That will reduce stress a lot.
Mike or Cheyenne, anything to add to that?
No, that's exactly what I was going to say, is just get to know the person and also just make sure that they are right for the role that they're in. Sometimes it's a job to have people also realize that maybe the role they're in is not perfect for them and they need to go to a different one. And that's a tough conversation sometimes to have, because sometimes for middle managers, there's nowhere else for them to grow within an organization, even smaller organizations. And so I think when you get to know the person, you can figure out where some of that burnout or chaos is happening. And sometimes it can be healed by just talking to people.
Mike, as your direct report, do you want to answer some of the ways you add stress? No, I'm just kidding.
Do you want to answer for everybody? No, I'm a stress-free person.
You are stress-free.
I will add on to just one other thought. I think going back to, and I think this has been a theme throughout, but if you're a more senior leader or you have anybody really that quote unquote is reporting to you or that works for you, and I think it's being thoughtful about how you again frame up what the task is. And so here are the outcomes that we're looking for. And it's important to juggle between and be clear on outcomes versus outputs. And output might be something that we're measuring to indicate progress, but ultimately it's not the thing that we're needing to end up with as the outcome. And if you focus on the outcome and frame that up for others that you're passing, that you're empowering to do some of these different work, I think that will add a level of clarity. And then, here's how I envision you might go about this, but then keeping that dialogue open. So as it's not just a one way, I hand it off and here's your outcomes, but it's like obviously keeping the dialogue open. What are the obstacles you're hitting? How can I think to help unblock those for you or make recommendations? And I think then you're not leaving people alone, on their own. And that's where stress can really compile if they're feeling trapped and unsure. So just some thoughts in that sense.
We've got another question here about the best ways to measure or any signs or indicators of satisfaction from employees as a small or medium-sized organization. Any tips for this viewer?
You asked us about how we found joy. I think it's also important to see how your team members find joy, and the fact that they are part of a team and that they are not feeling like they're the only one that they're isolated or not. We are very much a team. And especially their middle managers need to stand in front, stand behind wherever their team members need the support. And I think if you have laughter in your day, if you can have laughter about the weird phone calls, if you can have laughter about, the oops moments, and if someone makes a mistake, it's okay. They shouldn't be afraid if they've made a mistake to tell you they've made a mistake, and it's okay. I screw up. I'm the first one to screw up, and I tell them that I screw up, and I ask for their forgiveness when I screw up. And but I also try not to make anything. We try to have fun at the work, and we have some little places in the box office, like the weirdest thing we've ever been asked in the box office. We have a running list. We're going to put them on a T-shirt one of these days, we have moments. We have a bulletin board for the thank you notes, and when I get an email, it gets posted there. It goes all the way up. But if you can find a way of building a team, and then also making sure that your people don't realize this is life and death. It is not life and death. They can go home. They can have outside hobbies. They can talk to their children, their family, their spouses, their partners, their cats, their dogs, and they need to separate. When they leave work, they leave work. and have a life outside. And I think that's what we try to implement here at any rate.
I had a former client who used to always say, "We're not saving babies," and I often draw on that perspective when stress levels are high. We've got one more question here. I can see signs of burnout in myself and my colleagues, but I don't know whether senior managers, senior leaders recognize that pressure that they're under. Do you have any suggestions about how a junior team member can influence change or make that more visible to kind of the senior leadership?
Don't wait to have a conversation with them until they ask you to have a conversation. Start a conversation with them right away. That
Mm.
has helped me tremendously. I used to be a people pleaser, like I don't want to bring up anything that's wrong because I don't want my boss to know that I'm thinking about things that are wrong in my job. I don't want to stress them, but it actually had a reverse effect for me. And the minute that I started going to my boss and saying, "Hey, I really need help in this part," or "This way that we do this really makes me unhappy," or "I just need to talk to you for 5 minutes and get this off my chest," it has helped me tremendously. And then I've built a bond with my supervisor as well, that she knows now that I'm susceptible to burnout and can kind of like watch for it as well.
Mm. I think that's a great place to leave this. We are right about at time. I want to thank Cheyenne and Kate, both of you, for joining us both here and on the Intix stage, and Mike, you as well. This is a great conversation. Thanks to Intix for helping to distribute and execute on the survey. If you'd like to see the survey, it is available at spektrix.com. We'll also send it to everyone in the follow-up email, and you'll get a copy of this recording as well. And we would love to hear more of your stories. So we got a lot of great stories in the chat, but if you want to reach out to us, marketing@spektrix.com, we are still continuing to share stories that we're getting from these surveys. So please share with us. We just love having this conversation with the sector. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.